Hi. Everyone who's rolling in shortly will be here.
Hello.
Actually, we should probably do something that says, hey, Twitter people, come join as well. I should probably do that in the background while I'm talking. But welcome to Alt.net for month
October,
of
Richard.
October. Okay, lockdown has got me so confused. I actually don't know what month or year it is because this felt just like 2020. So it's been great. So again, welcome everyone to Diggs BTW. Awesome. What's up? That's very formal. I like that. So again, nice. So tonight we've got Simon Cropp joining us, a perennial open source contributor. If you look at his profile on GitHub, it's basically a solid block of green, except for a couple of days, which I assume are date night days, potentially, or birthdays, or the occasional illness. But apart from that, I don't know. Always on there, always active. And we thought it'd be cool tonight to have Simon on and just talk to us about various things he does and get you guys as a crew asking him questions and going, what the hell was that idea born out of? Or anything else that comes along, which is cool. Before we do, though, we should probably also cover off community happenings that are happening in the community.
Thanks, Richard. Yes.
Very well prepared, that statement, as you can tell. So GitHub Universe is kicking off tomorrow, I think, or Thursday our time. I can't remember which days, but anyway, GitHub Universe 2021. Lots of content on there. If you haven't already registered, go have a look at things. Put GitHub Universe in your browser. James is probably doing it at the moment based on where his eyes are gone and the fact that he's trying to type madly. There's all sorts of things in there, much more than just .NET stuff, obviously, so well worth a look at. But talking on .NET as well, we have, I think, 2 weeks to go, October and November 9th. The GA for .NET 6 is coming, .NET Conf, online in a browser near you on that date. So again, pop that one in your diaries, pay attention to the launches. There's a whole number of sessions on the day. Unfortunately, the time zone is obviously US-centric, so you can either wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and catch the keynote, or just wait for the recordings and catch it on replay. And then day 2 is the 24 hours of community content, which means you can effectively jump online anytime, have a look at what's going on, and pretend you're working. Is this recorded? Did I say that out loud? If you work for me or with me, I didn't say that. Beyond that, can't think of any other big things coming up. Just worth sharing those things for everyone. James, anything from your end of the world?
Oh, I just calculated the time zones thanks to the help of the calendar, and yeah, it starts at 2 a.m. on the 28th of October for those who like to get up early or maybe just not go to bed, and then runs through till 8:45. So if you're an early riser, you could catch half of it and still some sleep, conceivably, if you wanted to see it live.
Or you could just be, I'm really, I'm not feeling well.
Or maybe you're actually not actually in Sydney time zone anymore.
Oh yeah, that's
true. You just didn't care about where you were anymore in that same way.
There's a lot of we got some echo.
Ooh.
Anyway,
am I echoing? Are you echoing?
Like I said at the start, I can't hear one of us having the stream open in the background.
Okay. Well, I was going to say there a lot of .NET, like Microsoft shops in various areas, or .NET groups have set up launch watch parties. So if you're not in the exact time zone, have a look around your local .NET groups, and a lot of them are doing it. Well, basically, you stream it together and comment together, and you're on a screen share and all that kind of stuff. So if you're after that kind of group experience as things come out, that's a good option to go with.
Indeed, and make sure you do the back channel and the snide and snarky comments that we do love so much here. Speaking of which, yes, Lord Teaspoon, I am referring to you. All right. And yes, David Wengia, there is definitely no drama worth talking about in the .NET open source community and hot reload. Did I say that out loud?
Oh yeah, there was some drama going on.
Was there some drama? I missed it. Do you want to fill me in, James? Do you know?
It's once a week, right? And on that note, Ryder just, oh, I know where the echo's coming from now. It's me.
It's you. No, you got your extra machine going, or you started the Twitch stream and you're getting your delayed echo coming back at you.
No, it's for, I got an iPad so I can see the chat channel.
Ah.
So Ryder just came out with hot reload support. They did a blog post on it today, I think. So they said it was purely a coincidence. It was in the works for a long time. It was a happy coincidence, they said.
Sorry, Lord Teaspoon, no pizza. As we said, we try and get it sent to your place. You just have to put your public, your housing address on a public forum, and then trust us, we'll get something delivered to you.
We'll talk to our sponsors about that. You might get a JetSprains license.
The Pizza for Teaspoon sponsorship option. All right, so
licenses before we start the
yes.
Small part. So as usual, I'll ask you 2 questions at the end based on what Simon shows you, and the first 2 correct answers will indeed get their JetBrains license to any of their products. Cool. Okay, sorry.
Did we do Ozcode? Did we say Ozcode in there?
No Ozcode at the moment.
No Ozcode this month.
Yes.
All right.
Ozcode may return or it may not. We will find out. Stay tuned.
All right, they make no.
One more bit of news. There's currently betas of, or EAPs or release candidates of ReSharper, Rider, and Visual Studio, all with support for C# 10. So if people want to start playing with that, and I believe early versions of Visual Studio that are coming out with C# 11 stuff. So that should be on the horizon soon.
C# 11 already?
Well, I think the feature set is stuff that got pulled from C# 10 initially, and they've bumped it out to C# 11. But yeah, they are speccing stuff up there.
Yeah, which is cool. All right, so that's it. Again, hi everyone who's here, which is cool. Mr. Nosy Ratio, you are welcome as always. And I think we should throw it over to Simon. So as mentioned, perennial non-stop open source contributor, very much the alt part of alt.net. We love it. All the stuff that's not coming out of Redmond directly, we definitely want to make sure we highlight as part of what we do with this group. So what better to do than go all the way to Canberra and invite Mr. Cropp on. So welcome, Simon, officially.
Thank you very much for having me. It was funny you joked about my GitHub, contribution profile, because there's one slice in it a few years ago where I was on the island with no internet. And that's a solid 7 days of no messing with GitHub.
Did you start twitching?
I did, yeah. It's by the end you kind of get over it. You've gone through withdrawal, but the first couple of days was weird. I also broke my neck a few years ago and had a bit of time in hospital, so it was interesting. You couldn't lift your head up, so it's hard to use a computer when you're laying down.
Just trying to shove all the pillows behind your head and just prop yourself up.
Yeah, no, it didn't work. So what I'm going to do today is walk through a bunch of my more prominent or useful .NET projects. I've got little samples for each one. I've got links for them. Sorry for all the arms, it's a habit. And I'd really like people to come back with any questions at any point in time. If you want to stop and dive deeper into anything, feel free to pause it and we can deep dive into any particular topic. If you want to save your questions up for the end, we can loop back to any of those. On that topic, all of these projects are MIT. It's just for license I choose. There's a couple of projects that pull in data from external sources. So those are effectively dual licenses where the data it pulls in is licensed to a third party, but all the code that does that pulling in is MIT. And I guess I'll dive straight in. It's going to be a very code-heavy session.
Love it.
Most of the time will be spent in Visual Studio or other tooling.
2022 preview 4.
Well, I apologize if anything breaks. It is Visual Studio RC and ReSharper EAP, and actually this sample's still .NET 5, so we aren't quite onto the. I want other people to be able to use it, and if you switch to .NET 6 at the moment, it's a bit painful to people to contribute. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to walk through is my snapshot testing library called Verify, which is an alternative to your traditional asserts. So diving straight in. So this is your traditional assert model here, where you have something that returns so this is your method under test, this is your data you're pumping in, and this is your assertion. So the traditional assert walks through one or more properties and performs assertions on each of those to confirm it's correct. And it will generally fail on the first one, depending on which assertion library you're using. So if the given names isn't correct, you won't know about any of the others until you actually walk through and fix those one by one and rerun the tests. So if I just bring up a side-by-side of snapshot testing. So this is the equivalent of snapshot testing. So it's showing an example here of passing the objects through to the snapshot testing library, and also an optional extra assertion here that this type of assertion doesn't fit well to snapshot testing, because obviously the age continues to change over time for that person coming back. So that would make the test too fragile. Just let me do one more thing. I'm just going to delete all of my snapshots so that we have all the tests will fail. Yep, all gone. So if I run this, this is simulating running this one for the first time. If I run this now, that's another test. Okay. Okay, so what's happened here is it's failed the test. It's outputted the results to the, so we don't have a verified file, that's the snapshot. We have a received file of what's contained inside that. But the interesting thing that's happened is it's popped up a comparison tool. Now, in this case, my machine has Beyond Compare installed, and it's saying that we received this content, we have no verified content, and you need to make a decision that is this correct or not. So if it isn't correct, you would close this, you go tweak a few more things, and you'd rerun the test again. But in this case, it is correct.
Because it's the first time you ran the test, and the tests are always correct the first time.
Well, they are when you're doing a sample. Right? So Verify comes with a tray tool. There's multiple ways to accept any given change. The preferred way that I've found is a tray tool that actually monitors system-wide all the snapshots that have passed or failed. So you can see here that this is my solution. I've got one pending move. So when you accept a snapshot for the first time, it's basically moving the existing file over to the non-existing file. So move this file over to here. And it's also a move when you have a change. So for now, I'll just accept that. Now, if I rerun this, it'll pass. So behind the scenes, what's happened there? Inside your Solution Explorer, it's created a snapshot file that is the output of that test underneath your tests class. So I'll just remove those ones. Okay, so you can see here's our test and here's our file down here. So I'll just walk through that again just so you get that workflow. So I can just delete that snapshot file, rerun this, accept that change. Well, I'll show you inside the. So you can see at this point in time, while we're in this intermittent point, we have a received file and a verified file. So this is effectively pending and current. So when we accept that, see the received disappeared, and now we only have a verified.
That's cool.
So this works via Newtonsoft serialization. It's Newtonsoft rather than SystemText JSON because Newtonsoft is still way more configurable than SystemText JSON. And we don't need the uber performance that SystemText JSON gives us. It's much more valuable to have the configuration benefits of Newtonsoft. So down here, this is a test that returns multiple. So we've got effectively a numerable of people. If we run this, you can see here we've got the find all received and verified. We've got the proposed new file. We accept that. And now we've got a new one. Now I'll just show you the multi. So when you run your tests, one of the benefits of snapshot testing is that if multiple tests fail, you can accept them individually or in bulk or whatever you want. So if I delete both of those and run, I now get two compare tools pop up, and I can accept individual ones, or I can accept them all, or I can discard them. So accepting all, and we rerun this, it passes. If I had, I'll fail it again, and I'll show you the discard. If I discard, so what's happened, it's cleaned up the temporary files. Well, sorry, it doesn't clean up the temporary files. It closes all the diff tools. This is just, this is empty because comparison tools need the information to actually be there to run. So if I run this again and accept. So moving forward, I'm not going to right click down here. This tool has a accept all hotkey, which I've got configured. So I'll just verbally say I'll accept it. You won't see any right click down here. So if I just do Control-Alt-A, it's accepted those changes, and now the test pass. Now the interesting thing about this is, let's say if I change this to be right, so you're changing the output of what description is for a person. I run this. Okay, so this is what we actually get now. So you get to very quickly see exactly what's changed in any given test. So this is for the single version, this is for multi-version, and then you can, again, accept, decline, or whatever. So I'll just accept that. Now, the approach this uses is to get that snapshot is serialization. Now, if you take a very loose concept of what serialization is, you can serialize anything in memory over to a disk representation. As long as that disk representation can be compared by both the machine and hopefully via eyeball, then that's a good candidate for a snapshot test. So I'm just showing you a POCO object serializing for a JSON and comparing those two things as text. But for an equivalent So this is a more complex sample. We have this is your standard Blazor app. Right, it's for, right, it's what comes out of the
Amazing.
box. Yeah. Everyone's seen that so many times.
With an unhandled error. Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so what we can do here is, you're aware of Playwright and Selenium, and there's another one that slipped my mind. So those allow you to automate a browser and capture the rendered information from the actual browser. So this is running a real version of the app, spinning up a browser, and what we're doing is we're going to capture that page content, and we're going to do what we consider the most sensible thing to do with it. So in this case, run this. Okay, so what's happened here? We've got some infrastructure stuff up here to handle spinning up our app, right? So we're actually doing a process start and .NET run to just get Blazor up and running. Then we're going to navigate using Playwright to a given page, wait for the page to finish rendering, and then we're just going to pass this iPage is a Playwright instance of an object. So Verify understands what to do with that. So when you pass a page in, what's happened is it said, okay, here's the rendered content of that page. So, and again, this is for compare tool. So this is on the left is what we received. On the right, this is what we have, which is nothing. And this is an overlay down the bottom. And I'll show you how the overlay works in a second. But since it's a page, we also have the HTML. So here we have the actual HTML we received. Okay, so let's just accept that for now. Now you'll see here we now have, for that test, we now have two files. The first file is for HTML and the second one is for PNG. If I run it again, it'll pass. Okay, so let's just change that page. Pages, index. Right. So now we rerun this. So we get the HTML and it points out exactly where the difference is. But more importantly, we also have the diff where we can see in an overlay how it's actually rendered. So you can see here it's highlighted in red where the different text overlaps. So here's we have the received. This is our existing snapshot. Mm-hmm. And this is the diff of those two things. So again, it's two ways where you can very clearly see exactly what's changed in any given test. So this applies to, you can snapshot test Word documents. So a Word document will split it out to a metadata file that contains number of pages, the size, all the metadata about the document. It'll also split that Word document out into a PNG per page of the document.
Yep.
So you get a snapshot of all of those. Cool. The same thing can be done with a PDF. If you snapshot test a Excel spreadsheet, you get a snapshot per workbook of that spreadsheet. Okay, so I'll just back a step to this one. We'll just accept all those. Now, often you don't want to snapshot test the whole page. You want to focus in on individual content. So for that test, we're going to leverage features inside Playwright, which allow you to query a specific element using a selector. So I run this one. So you can see here that this is what we've received. We don't have anything here. And this is the actual, the diff of the two. We also have the HTML for those. Now with Playwright, you can automate button clicks. You can poke in existing HTML. You can do whatever you want before you actually do the snapshot. So if you have a good side effect of doing this kind of stuff is over time, because these files get checked in, the snapshot files.
Yep.
Over time, you end up with this history of how the app changed between any given version. So you can see that for this code change, we reran all the snapshots, n number of snapshots changed, and we can tell that that's the actual impact of that. So you're not doing kind of, obtuse asserts to verify things work or don't. You actually have this history of what the actual output of any given change is.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that you can have conversations with designers and business people, because you can get them to sit down at a desk with you and say, if I change this and run it, this is what the output of a Word document is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And it really improves the conversations that you have with your business people or with your designers. So I'll run through a couple other examples of that approach. So Verify also understands WPF, understands WinForms. So this is testing a WinForm. So you can see it's got the calculator there, same scenario. Notice this one doesn't have a text file because there's no real text representation of a WinForm. If I run a WPF test, however, so for a WPF, you get the actual image captured output, but you also get the currently rendered XAML of that page.
It's quite neat.
That's cool.
Yeah. So also the Verify understands, as I said, Playwright Selenium, and has explicit support for BUnit as well. So if I come and have a look at here, so this is your standard BUnit test, and this is your BUnit test if you're doing with Verify. So instead of having to find and match, so this is a BUnit style of an assert, we can pass the actual component directly to Verify and get the output. Now with BUnit, there's no rendering engine at the moment. So you only get, there is a rendering engine, but there's no browser, so you don't get an image. So you get the metadata, and this is the binding model, just happens to have no properties for this test, and you get the HTML. So there's trade-offs there between, if you're doing the browser automation tests, you get the rendered image, but they're a bit more complex to set up and they run a bit slower. Where BUnit style tests are faster and easier to set up, but they don't give you the image. So it's a trade-off where you may use both for certain important screens. Sometimes you switch between the two for different things, and it's up to you which one you pick. Okay. So that's probably enough for Verify. I could probably do a whole episode of Verify, but we'll just quit that at the moment. Another project that is quite popular.
Before you move on, so since we're talking about open source, what's the contribution side of things like?
In terms of how do people contribute, or
yeah.
So all of my projects are on GitHub. It's just what I've settled on as a default. 30 has a bit more of a stricter contribution model. It's just without adequate repos, it's very hard to debug the IL side of it. But all the other projects, it's very simple to actually contribute because it's standard .NET code. All of my projects have pretty good test coverage. They're not using any fancy tooling out of the box, so they should all run with .NET Build and .NET Test. Yeah.
You've
and happy to have contributions from anyone.
Issues marked as easy first timer kind of issues?
No, I don't. I tend not to do that because I found if issues are easy first timer, I'd rather just fix it and get it out there for people who are using it. Yeah. It's, if it's a 5-minute fix for me, I'll just fix it and ship it. So if someone does find an issue and they want to fix it, they're always happy to have a go. Or I sometimes do Zoom calls with contributors to help them get up to speed in contributing.
That's cool.
Cool. What proportion of it would you have written, and what proportion from contributors do you think?
It depends very much on the project. So Verify is relatively new. I've probably written 90% of it, but the genesis of Verify was a project called Approval Tests, which I'm also a contributor on. And that was primarily written by Llewellyn Falco. So while he hasn't contributed a lot to Verify, how it works is very much inspired by the problems he'd already solved in a previous tool.
That's cool. Oh, we had one question as well from Andrew.
Yep.
He said, very cool. Does it also work for a very basic case like capturing and comparing two console outputs?
Yes, so there's recording concepts where you can run a given test and it will record in the background either all SQL calls or all entity framework calls or all logging calls, and then you can append that output to Verify. But you can also just capture the output directly for when you're testing your console app. So you redirect your console output to effectively a line-by-line list and verify that output.
Cool.
David's got one as well, James.
Yeah, I'll pop that one up. Okay, so we've got one from David. Can you write your own capturers or serializers or whatever to allow comparisons of custom things?
Yes, so the serializer for the JSON is locked into Newtonsoft, but you can customize that as much as you want. All the settings around Newtonsoft are fully exposed and you can tweak it however you want. You can also register type-based converters, Playwright and WPF and WinForms. They're actually extensions to Verify, where when you use those, so if you look at the, so this exists as an extension to Verify. It's not in the main library. So for each thing that you're plugging into, you pick and choose what converters you use to do that. So for instance, if you're converting a Word document, there's multiple different ways to do that. If you have an Expose license, you can plug it into Expose to convert a Word document to PNGs. If you don't have an Expose license, there's a tool called DocNet that Verify supports. So you pick and choose what converters you want and pull them in based on your circumstances. So I'll show you the so this is the list of add-ins that I currently have for it.
Wow, that's a lot.
And if you want to create a custom converter or any of that kind of stuff, you can come in and pick one that you think is doing a similar thing to you and use that as a base as a template. A couple of these have been.
There's things in there I've never heard of, like what's Squibble and Hash.
Good question. Oh, so this plugs into Verify, and the text output you saw when tests fail.
Yeah.
Right. It just dumps the text out by default. Right. There's no smarts in the output here of what's actually changed. So by default, Verify kind of leans on the diff tool that you have plugged in to show you those differences. Quibble's a tool that will take into JSON files and tell you the exact path that each file has changed and how it's changed. So if you are comparing large JSON files and they can change in dynamic ways, this result is much better to have than two big blobs of text in your output. And this comes in more when you have build outputs from a CI server, because obviously you can't launch a diff tool from a CI server. Okay. So just on the note of, you saw that I was popping up beyond compare here. So if I do,
which, as Francis mentioned, is currently on sale.
It's an awesome tool.
We should get sponsorship, Richard, if you're going to mention that.
So Verify out of the box supports quite a few different diff engines. So this is the list it currently supports. So what happens is you don't need to do any configuration for this. It will pick the best diff tool that is installed in your machine for a given file format. So, and it does that by, under the covers, it has a mapping of how to find a diff tool, right? So this is how it finds it on different operating systems. And it also knows what file formats this diff tool is good at handling. So if there's a new image format that Beyond Compare doesn't work, but another format, so you look here, Delta Walker supports much more, many more formats. So it will pick the best one to find. Sorry, the best one to use for the given compare that you're doing.
Wow,
and you've also
a lot of work in this.
Yeah.
the matrix of all the different tools for each OS was an interesting challenge. But yeah, and you can configure your own, and you can customize the order. So the order that it goes through is predetermined, but it's not hard coded. You can say you particularly like, Araxis merge. You can reorder it so it bumps that to the top in the selection order. Okay. I guess that's really enough of verify, because otherwise we'll get stuck there. Yeah. Okay, so Naughty Strings is a third-party project called the Big List of Naughty Strings. So I pulled that in and wrote a .NET API around it. So when you pull it in, you can pick either.
What does that? Okay, that's what it's.
Sorry, I'll give you a bit more of a. I've got a source list here, so it's a big JSON file. Right, and it's just a whole lot of strings that will break things for you.
Yes,
now
I've seen this one.
Yeah, so I've written a .NET wrapper for this that pulls it in. So the different categorized Naughty Strings are available via however you want, or you can use them all. So if I just run this, you can see it's outputted for SQL injection tables. That's a special list of strings that are likely to break Unicode stuff. And this is some other Unicode strings. Now, the interesting thing is when I ran this earlier, if you have a look here, that's what that string should look like, right? The browser knows how to handle that. It's a mess, but that's how it's meant to look. So what I did was actually plug this in. I noticed both ReSharper and Visual Studio don't actually handle these strings correctly. Because if you look here, that's not too bad. But when you do the output, you can see it's lots of boxes. All right, so just as part of writing this sample, it's showing that ReSharper doesn't handle the coding correctly. So what I found this useful for is any kind of input that you have, Windows Forms, WPF, Web API, whatever. You write some tests where you script this up, or you can do it manually. You can just copy the strings over, and you dump those strings into the input. And the majority of the time, you're going to break something. So you can automate this with just give me all the strings, and then you can loop over any given API and pump all of those through. It's particularly good if anything's doing serialization to check that your serialization handles all the scenarios. And it almost always finds bugs very, very quickly. Unfortunately, it finds the type of bugs that are very, very difficult to debug.
So we shouldn't use it because it'll find the bugs that we don't want to fix.
Well, yeah. Depends how resilient you want it to be, how resilient you want your software to be. It's all fun and games when you build software and then it corrupts data when someone in China uses it. It's much easier to have those things reproed locally than trying to get a user to give you the steps to doing it. Okay.
Yeah, emoticons were a problem for a while, even.
Yeah.
I remember they causing a lot of trouble.
We'll come back to that one next. Okay, Replicant is a browser cache that understands the browser rules. So it understands e-tags, understands last modified, understands how to communicate with a server, sending those things back. And it's effectively a disk cache. So as much as possible, I've modeled it on how the different browsers work, but it's in .NET, and you point it to any given disk location and you have a cache. There's a bunch of different settings there, expiry and all that kind of stuff. But this is the simplest example. So you can see here, this is a simple run. And sorry, I didn't pump that output. Right, so here's your empty string. So that thing's not working anymore. Let me show you the other one. Okay, so I'm using verify to illustrate how this works, but the response from that is in this case, HTTP response. There's shortcut methods so you can get a stream or bytes or lines, but this is where you get the actual HTTP response. There's the actual image that came back, and here's the actual payload that came along. And if I come and have a look at in here, I've set up my disk cache to be here. So for any given file, for any given resource that you're retrieving, there's 2 files. You can see I was experimenting with this earlier. So it takes a copy of all the metadata, so that when you call it again and you get a HTTP response back, it plugs all this stuff in so it looks like you've got all the headers there, so you can treat it like a real HTTP response. It also stores the binary file, whether that's JSON or an image or whatever. Okay.
So how does using that help too much?
I should remember to, when I'm done with each one, remind me to pause and ask for questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so shoot. So what's the question?
So yeah, with this, how does this? What's the problem it's trying to solve, I suppose?
So at the moment, if you're writing something that relies on an external resource, so pulling down an image, a JSON payload from a third-party resource, at the moment in .NET, there's no way to cache that. So the browser the server can be doing all the correct things. They can say, you do a request and it can return not modified, but unless you have something to use when they return not modified, you can't do anything with it. Also, there's stuff like e-tags where you can do the e-tag handshake, where every time you retrieve a resource, it can optionally give you an e-tag. When you do another request, you have to send the same e-tag back, and then the server can say, okay, we've got the same e-tag, not modified. .NET doesn't. There's nothing in .NET that does that for you, right? You've got to manually store the e-tag. You've got to manually store the resource so that if they do return a not modified, you have something to use when they return a not modified. You've got to understand how the e-tag and not modified headers work. And HTTP client doesn't do any of that for you. So HTTP client is, fairly dumb in that aspect, because it passes the headers you pass up and returns the headers you pass back. It doesn't do any of the proper handshaking of how browsers work.
I see.
Yeah, and there's an entire workflow around that as well. There's a cool feature where stale if error. So this is a HTTP spec where for a given resource, you can say, give me this resource. And if the server says boom, you can say, look, I don't really care. I've got a copy of it anyway. I'll use the stale copy. So if you're talking to an unreliable server to retrieve resources, it's very helpful to, just use the stale one.
Okay, so you'll still pass through and make a call to the remote resource. You're not just hitting the cache all the time. It's more a case of
you can't. You can. The server can respond with a headers that basically say, it can say this resource will never change, so you can cache forever. It could say this resource changes once per week, and it does that by saying it will change at the next date.
Because
So
you're adding in the request headers on the outgoing part. Okay.
Yeah, so you don't always hit the server. Sometimes you just pull back from cache. And the other thing is when you do a request, it doesn't do a full request. Initially, it does a HTTP head request.
Right.
And it parses the head request. So there's less load on the server because it just gives you back the headers for that response. And then based on that, it streams that down. And then based on those headers, it optionally queues up the rest of the actual response coming down.
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty much giving you the kind of browser optimizations for your .NET call, right?
Yeah, and it's an approximation because none of the browsers do a good job of fully explaining how their caching rules work. But it's an approximation of that.
Makes sense.
Interesting. So I assume it's just standard HTTP response. If you get like a 100 continue kind of response coming back, it's up to us to handle it on the calling side. It's just single request each time, and then.
Yeah, under the covers, it's still using HTTP client, and so this is a systemnet HTTP, so you can operate at that level.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that one. Oh, any other questions from the?
Not at this stage, unless they're typing at the moment.
Okay, so text copy is something that I needed to. I had a requirement for a multi-platform clipboard. I only needed text. I didn't need binaries, and .NET doesn't provide this. So you have there's a specific clipboard that works in WinForms. There's a specific clipboard that these are different, effectively different classes, different assemblies with different APIs. So there's one in WinForms, there's one in WPF, there's one in UAP, and they're all. I don't know about that one, but and none of these work on different OSs. So they don't work on Linux, they don't work on Mac. So this is a single API that works across all of these different platforms. It is only text, and it's also async and non-async. So this was helpful. I needed this because I was deploying an assembly that different people were consuming on different platforms. And part of the features of that assembly was it needed to be able to set the text in the clipboard. So I effectively wrote this up. Under the covers, it uses, so if it's on OS X, it uses the proper low-level APIs for Mac. And similarly with the other libraries, it knows how to map through to the Android SDKs and get copy to them. And it works in Blazor through a tiny little bit of JavaScript. So yeah, it's kind of a niche tool, but sometimes people might need it. So I thought I'd throw it up there.
James, you want to drop Andrew's comments up?
Yeah, sure. All right. So we've got in two parts. So shocking that Blazor WebAssembly doesn't have anything like that, or does it? And then he looked it up.
You kind of feel like you need to go dun, dun, dun at the end of that question, but
and it came up to Simon's commits in Polly's repo.
Yeah, so I've ported bits and pieces of this code to different libraries for niche scenarios, but this is the definitive one that I use when I need it to work across most of the platforms.
just checking. Maui's got some clipboard stuff in there.
Okay.
I don't know what the coverage of it's like, but I can see at least clipboard related code in there.
Oh, since we're Australian, we'll cut to this one now. So I don't know if you've ever done anything with Australian Electoral Commission. If you want to look up maps or data about any electorates, it's many different form clicks, logins. You get different formats for different years. Maps are in different formats, etc., etc. So we had a requirement to have an easy way to get electorate data through both a .NET API and also accessible via effectively the cloud as well. So this is the .NET API here. So you can just query electorates. Obviously, I pick Canberra. Now, if I run this thing, so this is scraped from the Australian Electoral Commission's website with their permission. They're aware of this project, and you can see you can get all the information for any given electorate. It's a much more detailed than this. You can actually see the history of the electorate, how it's changed over time. You can get maps for different electorates over different years. You can find out who won different and who lost and by what ratios. So it's effectively all of AEC's exposed data.
Yes, I've scraped this data myself. So that's very cool.
So this is for, they have
this when you're at Get Up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing we needed was map data. So this actually has, it exposes for GeoJSON for each electorate. And it also exposes, AEC maintains a detailed PDF map. So we port those to PNG so you can get an actual detailed map of each electorate. So again, this is a niche thing, but it's good to know about it if you ever dealing with a client who needs this information.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, very cool. I think
you didn't want to work for you just didn't know.
Yeah, we scraped. It was a while ago that we scraped things from PDFs and all sorts of things. It was hard work to collect this sort of data. Yeah,
it is. And the tooling this thing requires to actually work. I've got command line tools for converting different image formats, and yeah.
Impressive.
So in a similar approach, so this is using the same methodology as the Australian electorates. So there's a third-party source of data, country data, called the GeoNames database. It's massive. It's hundreds of megs of zipped up data here that you can pull down. The UI over it is terrible, but it is an awesome source of data, and it's well maintained. So again, we needed this as a .NET API where we could, select suburbs and postcodes and various other things. So this is an example of using the country data database and pulling it in through, just picking different state provinces, and you'll see here. Right, so you can pull this in. The interesting thing is this also exposes the postcode database for Australia, which if you want to get access to the suburb and postcode names for Australia and location data, I think you need to pay Australia Post. It's an obscene amount of money now, but you don't want to do it.
Used to be you got like a download of it for quite a lot of money.
Yeah. Okay. So the data is available here if you do need that. Now this is designed in such a way that because the data from that GeoNames database is massive, this is implemented in a resource approach where you have a resource of data per country. So because I loaded up Australia here, none of the information from the other countries came into RAM. So it means you can use it without blowing out the memory profile of your app for just the countries you need.
Good move.
There's also a bogus extension for that, so you can generate random information using the bogus API.
For those who don't know, what's bogus?
So bogus is a data generation library where it's a fluent API for mapping a target to different information. So it allows you to have very clean and quick ways of building up, your person objects for testing, building up temp databases for doing various things, generating data for samples for customers. And I'll just output this one. So you can see here it's picked, some random information. And if we run it again, it'll be random again. So if you're building up people and addresses, then this is a good API to kind of get into that. But for any kind of fake data that you want. Any questions on that one?
No, that's cool. It's really nice. So I suppose I know we're getting towards time. I'm kind of curious just to ask a couple of questions outside of the projects themselves.
Go for it.
Why so much time doing open source?
Well, I do have the privilege of time. I don't have kids, so that does make it easier. Also, most of the open source projects that I've used, they are for clients to solve specific problems. So they're built out of the, I guess you'd say, the not invented here mentality. But I think most good open source projects are invented that way. If you see something that doesn't exist and you need to get it going, to plug a hole and speed things up, I like to try and solve those problems in a way that solves it for me, but for everyone else. So a lot of these have been niche targeted tools on various client code bases, and then I've pulled them out to be wrapped it in a NuGet. Often on a client site, you might be working. So for instance, that Australian electorates data.
Yep.
The client needed to use that electorate data in 3 different isolated projects. They're not in the same solution.
Mhm.
So you're already wrapping it up in a NuGet. I may as well just publish it publicly. And most clients are not interested in owning this kind of stuff. They want their business problem solved. They're not in the market of selling niche tools to solve specific problems.
We've got a question actually. Do you have to sell the clients on spending their time on these, or does that come after the job is finished? And this does tie into my days as a consultant as well. It was occasionally we got to publish things as open source, but it was pretty hard to convince my usual clients that were banks and financial companies to allow us to do that sort of thing, considering that they'd paid their hard-earned a lot of money actually for our time, and they didn't want their competitors to also get the advantage either, even if they would or not. They always worried about that sort of thing.
Yeah, it depends on the client. I'm generally in longer term contracts, so you do build up a certain amount of trust in those, and they are more accepting of doing those things moving forward. Also, most of my clients are government departments who they're not in it for a profit, and they don't want to compete with, like, if a company uses that tool or another government department uses that tool, they're indifferent.
Yes,
it doesn't really matter.
Be a big part of it.
Yeah, so I have had a few contracts with private firms where you do have to have that conversation of, we want to build this in the public, we want to share it. Usually you have to go down the path of, more people seeing it means it will be maintained in the future, more bugs will be found, security holes will be patched, and you've got to sell them on, your business isn't owning code that isn't directly related to your business. A snapshot testing library, a bank shouldn't care about that. And also, it's a non-trivial amount of effort for them to maintain it moving forward. So if it does become open source and it does get a life of its own, they get to continue to reap the benefits of that. But yes, you do have to have that conversation.
So you mentioned maintaining it going forward with with the number of little projects that kind of start out this way. How have you managed to keep on top of those things and keep them up to date, or have some of those just kind of rotted on the vine?
I'm fairly aggressive at trimming off stuff that's going to rot. There's a few technical solutions I have for keeping things up to date. I have so this is a little NuGet called Project Defaults. It's on NuGet, but you won't really find much information about it. It's basically my personal preferences for how a project should be built. And it's done purely through MS Build. So all of my projects follow a convention. They're all built in the same way. And it means that when I make any given change on how the project structure works, I can apply that in a single place and it gets pulled into all the downstreams. In terms of pulling NuGets into downstreams, I use Dependabot. So if I publish a new version of this defaults, Dependabot in the next 24 hours will detect that change and push that change into all my downstream repos. There's another tool in here called Replicant. What's a better way of doing that? Oh, that's the wrong one. That's the other tool. Where is it? I don't think I've got it cloned. Oh, GitHub Sync, there we go. So GitHub Sync, the naming becomes hard when you have so many. So it allows you to have a template repository, which I'm configuring here, and then it allows you to cherry pick certain files out of a repository. Then you can add targets to apply based on those files and synchronize between repositories. So this is helpful when you have, let's say you want a git ignore file and you want it to be the same between different projects, or you have VS settings files. So, you've got or a code of conducts, licenses, any of this kind of stuff, or even resharper settings. So this tool allows you to take a source repository and apply that as a template to all of these other repositories. And it does that there's two mechanisms. It can either do a direct commit to those target repositories, or it can do a pull request approach. So often the pull request approach is for stuff that you want the CI to happen beforehand. So that helps keep projects in sync. What else would there be?
And then things on like issue management and people asking questions, discussions.
Yeah, it's the only one that it got a bit over the top with was Thody. We had quite a few people who were using it, very few people who were helping out. And it's kind of that niche where it's hard enough to contribute to IL weaving that people just balk at contributing. I mean, I'll quickly show the output of that. So for people who aren't aware, Thody takes in, during your build, takes the input assembly and manipulates it in certain ways behind the scenes. So it does it on the IL level. Where's my sample? Oh, sample. There it is. When it actually opens up. Okay. So this is IL Spy looking under the covers. If I get, so property change is probably the most popular one. Here's our class in .NET. Now, if you want to implement property change, you've all been through that. It's adding multiple lines to this. So you got to pick how you pass it through. It's a bit of a pain in the ass. So under the covers, when this is built, what do I call that? Property change based person. So you can see here it's actually implemented a property changed under the covers. It's also worked out that the full name property uses the given name and family name, so that when you change family name, it also does a property notification for full name.
Cool. Very nice.
Another one of that is, you've probably been in a situation where you've had a resource and you need to load that using code, and you got to know the resource name, you got to remember the namespace, etc., etc. So Resourcer gives you a strong typed API to that. So this resource is an embedded resource
Mhm.
here. Now, rather than doing assembly.get resources, having a magic string, this uses a kind of it's strong type, but not. It passes through a string here, and you'd think, oh, that's a magic string. But at compile time, it actually validates that that resource exists in the assembly. So it tells you that it can't find that resource. So you can't actually have an invalid string here. So if you look at the right, so it's actually embedded in the code to load the resource, and then it validates that resource at compile time. So it's not possible to have a mismatch between a resource name and the actual resource. So similarly with with reflection, here's a class we want to reflect over. This looks like magic strings, but it will actually not compile if you don't have the correct strings there.
That's quite neat.
And it also optimizes that down into some very optimized reflection code for right. So it's actually doing get method handles, and it's also using low-level IL that ILSpy doesn't understand how it works, because there's some features about loading. C# doesn't expose the full gamut of IL in terms of reflection. So for instance, we only got module initializers just recently. That's been in the IL spec for years. So there's a few tweaks in here where we can actually use effectively the keyword field of and property of in IL that you can't do in C# yet. So it means it's much quicker, because to get a field in reflection, you've got to get the type, you've got to get the field. But actually by IL level, you don't need to. You can just say field of and pass in the ID for that field. So it's faster, it's safer, uses less memory. Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of just being on top of the issues, and we were talking about that before we kind of went off on a tangent.
Sorry. So yeah, the Fody was one of those ones. We actually put in a payment kind of strategy for Fody.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd call it a success, but it's $3 a month per user, and it's kind of a strongly encouraged optional payment. It's still MIT. You can still use it and not get sued. But there's some text in the issue templates and pull request templates where it says, we'd much prefer you to pay for this.
Okay.
And it's had an interesting effect, because a lot of people have just balked at that and just stopped using it. Other people have actually put more effort into raising issues, because there's this concept of, well, I'm not paying, but if I raise a good issue, maybe if I fix it for me anyway. So it's had some interesting side effects, but I wouldn't call it a success, and I'm not planning on doing it for any of my other projects. But that's the only one that I had a real heavy workload of issues coming through.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing because I split my projects into very small bits of Lego, the issues you get and the pull requests you get generally seem to be, they're very, very targeted, because they're not dealing with all the other moving pieces of getting that repo working and running all the tests.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So Verify is split between 15 different repositories, all of which have their own suite of unit tests, their own issue tracking, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a bit more effort to set that stuff up initially, but it means someone can open that. There's one project, there's one test. It doesn't have this very complex test run or deployment mechanism or any of that kind of stuff. It's very, very simple to interact with that small slice of functionality.
Very cool. All right. Are there any other questions coming through the stream, or James, should we jump across to? Hopefully, you're paying enough attention to have some good questions to ask.
Nothing else in the stream. Yeah,
Doesn't look like.
5 minutes ago, I realized that I'd been quite entranced and not thought what questions I was going to ask. So I quickly cast my mind.
The question's going to focus on the last 5 minutes.
No, I've tried my best to remember things from earlier. So usually I do them as I go along, and they're more polished. So we'll just have to roll with what I've got. So yes, Simon, I must say you've built so many tools that are like all hard things to build as well, and shared them with people, which is very cool. Like the sort of things that you come to when you're working on a client site, and you go, well, that would be nice, but actually we'll just skip over that and do it some dodgier way because I don't have time to write a whole whatever to do this. And you've actually done it and shared it so that people can pull it in. So it's
Yeah,
very cool.
I have focused more in this on the projects I think are more useful or viable for people to use in different projects. I do have some very esoteric projects that I've, often it's on Twitter, someone says something isn't possible. And you're like, that's it. At 2 o'clock in the morning, you reply back on Twitter saying, here, I built this thing, but no one will ever use, but it's possible.
It's amazing. All right, next time I come to some problem that I find too hard, I'm going to tweet you and see whether you can sort it out for me.
At Simon, I'm stuck.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. So I suppose we better do the questions. Yeah, we are getting quite late. Okay, so on Verify, so what were 3 of the interesting formats?
Wait, just to recap for those who aren't aware, the questions are for what?
Oh yeah, for the JetBrains license. So we've got 2 JetBrains licenses to give away. No, I just like asking questions.
Just random questions.
Yeah, so for the first one, what are 3 formats that Verify can handle? And give you the diff and all the rest.
So do people respond now?
They usually do, yes.
Have I bored everyone off the channel?
No, they're probably typing.
Okay, well, while the first one comes in, so here I've got a markdown file that's got documentation. Here I've got oh, there we go. You got someone.
Yeah.
Boom.
Boom, there you go. Yeah, there was XAML as well. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it was even WinForms and
images
there on
whatever.
the web page.
Yeah.
It's quite cool.
So I'm just going to loop back to one more project that I use to help maintain all of my other projects. And this is called Markdown Snippets. So this happens at build time. So this is an initial documentation page, right? Here we have a corresponding class that has regions. Now when I build this, all of those
regions. You said regions.
I said regions, but you can do it with comments as well. It merges all those snippets into the Markdown page. Now, if you have a look at what that looks like when it's rendered. No? There's an open with here, but it's off the screen. Open with. Oh, now you're not even going to show me. It's that one. So what's happened is it's taken the markdown and it's stitched in the various different snippets under the covers. It's also given anchor links, so you can go directly to the GitHub page and the region in that file. It's also given deep links in here, so you can actually link to a given snippet. So you see the IDs up here. So if they click on an anchor in the docs, it gives them a deep link to this anchor. You can see how that works. So this means that if I change any code on every build, right, if I rebuild this, sorry, where's my code? Right, if I remove one of these rows, and rebuild, you can see it's up to date. So this works on, I have this plugged into all my projects. So it runs on build, it also runs as a GitHub action, so that I never have a case where I have snippets that don't compile. So pairing this with with Verify, you can actually have the output of snapshots as snippets as well. Right, so you can have a unit test, right? This is actually a unit test down here that verifies the output,
Right.
has a test here, has the data, produces a snapshot file, and then all of that is stitched together into a documentation file. And this,
Pipeline all the tools together.
Yeah.
yes. And this works really well for maintaining larger code bases of snippets, because it means any given change that you do to any given API, you instantly get to see how that will affect the changes in the documentation as well. So it gives you a better idea, because now you're seeing, I changed this API and this will reflect the documentation in this way when you look in your diff tool. It also means that that documentation is up to date when you do the PR for that change. So anyone who's looking at that change can see in the documentation how usages of that API changed. Anyway, I think that's the last one.
Right, I'll give you the last question then. We've got one more question. So, yeah, what are 2 tips for selling open source to your, well, I mean, releasing a piece of code that you've written as open source for talking to your employer or your client, depending on where you work?
Wait, do you want to try that question again? That was really long.
Really, sorry. Okay, what are 2 tips for selling the concept of contributing to open source to your employer or client?
Nice and concise.
Is that better, Richard?
That was better.
Good advice, but no one remembers. I regularly have the issue where I'm trying to convince clients to pay for open source. Like, do you guys have conversations with clients about paying for open source?
And I don't have clients.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
both of us used to be consultants, but neither of us are consultants anymore.
Okay.
So now no longer. But yeah,
So someone will be maintaining it for you, and even Microsoft is doing it these days, says Francis, which I don't think was one of the responses, but I like it. I like that one. Yeah.
I think Andrew is going to get both licenses.
Yeah, let's go with Andrew. That's fine.
All right. It sounds
well
good.
done.
Well, Andrew, you're going to have all the JetBrains products by the end of this session.
Which is handy because, hot reload.
It's back now, don't worry.
You can save it for the renewals, but they do expire after a few months.
Anyway, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm Simon Cropp on Twitter, same on GitHub. And yeah, if you want to play with these tools or you want to experiment with existing code bases at clients or customers or even open source projects, I'm always happy to jump on a call, especially for snapshot testing. It's kind of my pet project at the moment. Just let me know.
That's super
fantastic.
Thank you very much for sharing it.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. It was really good running through everything. And next month is the last one for the year.
Oh, that happened quick.
Very true.
Wow, November comes around so fast. So we will have something for you for next month.
Or in fact, if you have something you want to talk about or something you want to hear about, send us a message or a tweet.
As always. Sarah, are we going back to face-to-face meetings? Probably not, because, well, at least not yet, because we'd have to have a venue and we'd have to be organized enough, and we're not quite there yet in terms of particularly the venue piece.
Yeah.
I think it's still difficult getting space from a lot of companies at the moment, so we'll stay virtual for now.
I think so. We'd probably have
and
to.
And we've moved our Melbourne audience. Yeah, you're right, David. Unless we do the hybrid thing, we could do that.
You got to have it an outdoor picnic.
Have the presenter in a room, in an office somewhere, showing to everyone else who stayed home, because they're already working from home these days with lockdowns. Yeah, definitely something we're just keeping an eye on that one, and just obviously treading carefully in terms of COVID restrictions and limitations, and the sensitivities different companies have around where they're at as well. So we get there. But yeah, we'll let you know what's happening next month. Stay in touch as always. Remember to ping Simon at Simon Cropp with 2 P's, and say thanks to him on the Twitters. Can't we do it in a pub? Again, we've got to get organized.
Sensitivities carefully. We might have a very small audience.
Yeah.
And it would have to be in a physical location as well, wherever
Yeah.
it could be. Yes.
All right. And that's
All
it
right.
for now. That's it for this
Cool.
month.
Thank you very much,
Enjoy your
guys.
evenings, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.